Before the sun even touched the city, a cold, empty parking garage sat beneath a billion-dollar tower. And in the center of it rested a red Ferrari so polished it looked like it owned the building more than the CEO himself. At the far end of the garage walked Marcus, the black janitor everyone ignored, the man who cleaned the floors before people with power arrived to dirty them again. His uniform was faded, his shoes were worn, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity most men twice his salary didn't have. As he pushed his cart past the Ferrari, he paused. Not to touch it. Just to look. To someone else, it was just a luxury car. But to Marcus, the sound of the engine cooling, the tiny vibration under the hood, the faint, irregular clicking, it all told a story he understood instantly. He leaned in slightly, the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. And then a sharp voice cut through the garage. Victor Hemsworth, the CEO, the man whose ego was louder than every engine in the building combined. He stormed toward Marcus like he had been waiting for a reason to explode. He didn't ask questions. He didn't breathe. He just started yelling, accusing Marcus of smudging the paint, accusing him of scratching it, accusing him of putting his dirty hands on something he could never afford in 10 lifetimes. His voice echoed cruelly through the empty garage. And Marcus didn't fight back. He stood still, shoulders heavy, eyes calm, a man who had swallowed too many insults in his life to choke on one more. But what Victor didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that the Ferrari behind him was seconds away from a serious engine failure. Marcus heard it. Victor didn't. Marcus saw it. Victor couldn't. So when Victor finally paused long enough to inhale, Marcus spoke. Soft, steady, certain. Sir, your engine is about to fail. Victor laughed, mocked him, called him crazy. He had no idea that in less than 1 minute, something was about to happen that would flip their entire lives upside down. What they didn't know would change everything. The day before everything went wrong, Marcus had lived his life the same way he always did, quietly, gently, without asking the world for more space than it was willing to give him. He woke up in a small apartment on the south side of the city. The place was old but clean. Every item had a purpose. Every corner carried memories he never spoke about. A set of old mechanic's tools sat neatly in a wooden box beneath his bed. Most people wouldn't have noticed them, but Marcus looked at them every morning, the way a man looks at a past he's still learning how to let go. Outside his window, the city buzzed with ambition, a world rushing forward, never stopping to look back at the people who quietly held it together. Marcus tied his worn boots, grabbed his thermos, and walked out with the same steady heartbeat life had forced him to develop. Marcus had been working as a janitor for almost 5 years. Not because he lacked talent, not because he lacked knowledge, but because life had a way of taking people off the road they once dreamed of and dropping them onto a path they never asked for. In his 20s, Marcus had been an automotive engineer, one of the best in his program. He could diagnose a car problem just from the sound of the engine. He had dreams of designing engines that would change the industry. But dreams didn't protect him from the layoffs, the bias, the recession, or the unexpected tragedy that later swallowed half of his world. He never complained about the unfairness of it. He simply learned how to survive inside it. And so he cleaned floors inside a company that built technology worth billions. Every day, he watched executives brag about innovation while ignoring the people who kept their world clean, running, and alive. Victor Hemsworth was the loudest of them all. The CEO, 45 years old, rich since his 20s, a man who believed the world was split into 2 types of people, those who built empires and those who swept around them. To him, Marcus was invisible. Just another uniform. Just another name he'd never bother learning. Victor's days were filled with board meetings, angry phone calls, private lunches, and arguments he created to feel powerful. No one said no to him, but no one loved him either. Respect and fear were the same thing in his mind. He lived fast, fast deals, fast words, fast temper, fast cars, especially his Ferrari. That car wasn't just a vehicle. It was his identity, his pride, his symbol of superiority. And Marcus was everything Victor unconsciously judged. Each morning when Marcus entered the building, he nodded to security, greeted the cafeteria ladies, and smiled politely at employees who sometimes pretended their AirPods meant they didn't have to respond. Marcus noticed everything, not because he was nosy, but because life had trained him to read rooms, read people, read silence. He cleaned around conference tables and overheard conversations about stock prices, hiring freezes, and projects that needed better minds. He never envied their titles, only their freedom. Still, he found small joys. A warm thank you from the mailroom clerk, a joke shared with the security guard, a brief moment during lunch when he could sit and breathe. The only thing that occasionally stirred the old Marcus, the engineer Marcus, was the sound of engines in the garage. Expensive cars, loud cars, fragile cars, engines that whispered things only he understood. Every time he passed Victor's Ferrari, he noticed details others missed. The tire pressure on cold mornings, the slight shift in exhaust color, the tiny vibration hinting at a future problem no one was paying attention to. But it wasn't his place to speak. So he kept walking, kept working, kept silent. One afternoon, after a long shift, Marcus went to the employee break room. He sat alone as usual, sipping from his thermos. Two interns stood by the vending machine talking loudly about Victor's upcoming promotion event, the unveiling of a new multi-million-dollar tech breakthrough. To them, Victor was a legend, a visionary, a man who changed the game. Marcus didn't interrupt their excitement. But deep down, he wondered what kind of world celebrates leaders who don't see the leaders standing quietly right under their noses. As the day ended, Marcus returned to the garage to clock out. The Ferrari sat there glowing under the dim lights, its presence demanding attention even while resting. Marcus paused, listening to the faint metallic ticking of the cooling engine. And in that small sound, Marcus heard something else, something wrong. A misalignment. A minor rattle. A sign of something that could get worse. Something that could cost thousands, or lead to something far more dangerous. He stepped closer, not touching, just observing, like a doctor trying to understand what the patient wasn't saying. Marcus whispered to himself, "That's not right." And he walked away. He didn't know that tomorrow morning he would be blamed for something he never did. He didn't know he would be humiliated in front of the very car he understood better than its owner. He didn't know he would have only 60 seconds to change the trajectory of a man who thought he knew everything. But fate always starts quietly, in the small moments nobody pays attention to. And tomorrow, nothing would be quiet anymore. The next morning arrived like a storm waiting to break. Victor Hemsworth, the CEO, strode into the parking garage with the arrogance of a man used to the world bowing before him. Every step echoed authority. Every glance carried entitlement. The Ferrari sat under the overhead lights, polished to perfection, reflecting Victor's own pride back at him. Marcus was already there. He had arrived early, as usual. He was moving slowly, methodically, emptying trash bins, wiping floors, pushing his cart in precise, quiet patterns that went unnoticed by most people, but not by Victor, whose sharp eyes caught him immediately. Victor's voice erupted without warning. "What are you doing near my car?" It wasn't a question, it was a demand, a command laced with fury. Marcus froze, his hands hovered over the cleaning supplies. Calmness radiated from him, but inside a familiar tension prickled his nerves. Years of being underestimated had trained him for this. He didn't flinch, he didn't stutter, he simply looked at Victor with quiet acknowledgement. Victor stormed closer, towering over Marcus, his designer shoes clicking harshly on the concrete floor. "You think you have the right to touch this car, to even breathe near it? Do you know how much this costs? Do you know who I am?" Marcus remained silent, letting the fury roll over him like water. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. Silence, he knew, could be stronger than any argument. Victor's face contorted. He leaned closer, spittle flying, and continued his verbal assault. "You're nothing, you're dirt. You are beneath me, and I swear if I see a single scratch." He stopped mid-sentence, because Marcus's eyes had shifted. Subtly, not in fear, not in submission, but in asterisk awareness. Victor didn't notice the slight tightening of Marcus's jaw, the micro-adjustment of his stance, the way Marcus's hands subtly rested near the edge of the Ferrari hood. It was the pause before a storm that nobody sees coming. Victor resumed, louder, screaming accusations, mocking Marcus, insulting his clothes, his skin, his job, his life. He laughed bitterly at the idea that anyone beneath him could hold knowledge he didn't. "Do you even know how engines work? No, didn't think so." Marcus finally spoke, a calm, even voice that contrasted sharply with Victor's rage. "Sir, the engine is failing." Victor's laugh cut through the garage like glass breaking. You're saying asterisk me that my Ferrari is failing. You don't know a thing about cars, you're just a janitor." But Marcus didn't move closer. He didn't raise his voice, he just nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, I can fix it." Victor froze, blinking, incredulous. "You what?" Marcus didn't answer. His eyes, steady and precise, already scanned the engine. The subtle vibration, the faint metallic tick, every microdetail told him exactly what had gone wrong. Victor, blinded by pride and fury, didn't notice the faint trail of oil droplets that had begun to leak from a minor misaligned valve. He didn't notice the overheating coolant creeping along the engine block. He didn't notice that, without immediate attention, the Ferrari could be destroyed in under an hour. All Victor saw was the audacity, the nerve of a janitor talking to a CEO like he was equal. He shouted louder, step back from my car." Marcus stepped closer anyway, his hands still hovering calm, his movements precise. He leaned in and began the subtle gestures of inspection, tiny taps, a slight lift of a panel, a careful adjustment of a sensor. Victor's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" he barked, his voice cracking with anger and confusion. Marcus remained focused. No words, no justification, just action. Victor paced, his chest heaved. Anger bubbled into fear, fear of being wrong, fear of being powerless, fear of losing control. The janitor, the man he had mocked and belittled for years, was doing what no technician at the dealership could do in less than an hour. In under a minute, he was diagnosing the problem. The air between them thickened. The echo of Victor's fury collided with the silent authority of Marcus's hands. Victor's mind raced. Pride battled logic. Ego battled truth. He wanted to stop Marcus. He wanted to assert dominance. But the undeniable fact stared him in the face. The Ferrari, his symbol of wealth, power, and control, was in imminent danger, and only this man could save it. Jenna, who had entered quietly, stood to the side. She had been observing this interaction from the shadows, recording nothing yet remembering everything. Her eyes followed Marcus like a hawk, recognizing something in him Victor could not see. A brilliance unrecognized, a history unacknowledged, a man underestimated for far too long. Victor's hands trembled, his voice wavered, but his mouth opened anyway. You better not." Before he could finish, Marcus reached a critical point of diagnosis. The solution was clear. One small adjustment could prevent catastrophic failure. One small gesture would determine the fate of the car, and perhaps, in some unspoken way, the fate of their relationship. Victor recoiled. He wanted to yell. He wanted to assert dominance, but something in Marcus's calm, focused eyes made him pause. He didn't know what he was looking at. He didn't understand it. And yet he couldn't deny it. Victor's chest heaved. His eyes darted from the Ferrari's exposed engine to Marcus's steady hands. Rage battled disbelief. Pride battled logic. Fear battled ego. "Step away," Victor shouted, almost paralyzed by the audacity before him. Marcus didn't. He leaned slightly over the hood, eyes scanning gauges and panels. Then, without hesitation, he removed a small cover, tightened a connection, and adjusted a delicate valve. The tiny movements emitted barely a sound, yet the impact was monumental. The engine's slight tremor began to stabilize. Victor's mouth hung open. Words failed him. Every insult he had hurled just minutes ago seemed hollow. He wanted to stop Marcus, to assert power, to remind him of his place, but nothing he did or said changed what was happening. The Ferrari, the symbol of his wealth and control, was being saved by the very man he had demeaned. Jenna stepped closer, almost unconsciously. She wanted to witness this moment fully, not through her phone, not through lenses, but with her own eyes. She saw Marcus's calm determination, Victor's unraveling, and the quiet dignity of a man who had been overlooked for far too long. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice even and low, "if these adjustments aren't made now, the engine will seize. You'll be looking at tens of thousands in repairs, and it could happen while you're driving." Victor laughed nervously, a forced sound that betrayed his fear. You're saying this car could fail and it's your responsibility to fix it. You're nothing, you're—" The word stopped. Because Marcus didn't respond with anger. He didn't plead. He didn't justify. He simply continued his work, moving confidently as the seconds ticked away. Victor's mind spun. He had engineers who worked for hours without results. And now, this janitor, this man he had dismissed countless times, was doing what no one else could. In less than 60 seconds, the Ferrari's engine began to hum smoothly, its vibrations steady, its diagnostics stabilizing. Victor took a step back, almost falling into disbelief. He could see the gauges now. No warning lights, no erratic fluctuations, every system perfectly balanced. For the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. It wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable. His ego screamed for control, for dominance, for revenge. But the truth was undeniable. Marcus had saved his car, and in the process, he had shattered every assumption Victor had ever made about the people he looked down on. Jenna's gaze softened. She saw Victor's realization. The CEO, who had believed the world was divided between rulers and the ruled, was now staring at a man who embodied competence, intelligence, and calm, a man who could command respect without demanding it. Marcus stood straight, wiping his hands on a clean rag. He looked at Victor without a hint of triumph, only quiet assurance. Victor opened his mouth. He wanted to yell, to belittle, to assert power one last time, but no words came. He realized the battle had already been lost, not in the garage, but in his own perception. "Why, you fixed it," Victor stammered, disbelief heavy in his voice. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "It's safe now." Victor's knees felt weak. He had spent a lifetime convincing himself that he was untouchable, that authority and wealth equated to respect. And yet here he was, speechless in front of a man he had scorned for years. The garage, once a stage for humiliation, became a silent testament to truth. It wasn't about money or position or appearances. It was about skill, integrity, courage, and most importantly, it was about recognizing greatness in someone you had refused to see. Victor stepped back, hands shaking. He looked at Marcus again, really looked. He saw the history etched into his face, the years of struggle, the quiet strength, the brilliance hidden beneath a uniform no one had bothered to notice. The realization hit harder than any insult could have. He had judged a man by his job, by his skin, by what he assumed, and not by what was true. Jenna, silently witnessing everything, felt tears prick her eyes. The injustice, the arrogance, the quiet redemption unfolding, it was cinematic, but it was real. Victor, finally finding his voice, said nothing more. Words weren't enough, and Marcus didn't ask for any. He had acted because it was the right thing to do, not for praise or recognition. For the first time that morning, the garage was still. Not because the engine stopped, but because the world had shifted. A man who had thought himself untouchable now understood the weight of humility. A janitor, overlooked and underestimated, had proven that true worth is measured in actions, not appearances. And in that silence, something subtle changed. Victor didn't yet know how this would affect the rest of his life, but he sensed that the encounter had planted a seed, one that would force him to confront not just Marcus, but himself. Marcus pushed his cart slowly toward the exit, careful not to look like a hero. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply walked with dignity. Victor remained near the Ferrari, staring at the stabilized engine, realizing that the world he thought he controlled had shifted under his very feet, and that respect, like trust, could not be demanded. It had to be earned even from him. Jenna followed Marcus, watching him leave. She knew she had witnessed something rare, a collision of pride and truth, ego and skill, injustice and integrity. And as Marcus disappeared into the stairwell, Victor finally whispered, more to himself than anyone else. I was wrong." It was the first admission of humility he had allowed himself in decades. And though Marcus didn't hear it, didn't even respond, the words marked the true beginning of the reckoning, the moment where lessons would be learned, egos reshaped, and lives forever altered. The inciting incident had ended. The stakes were set, and no one involved would ever see the morning or themselves the same way again. The parking garage was empty now, except for the faint smell of engine oil and the lingering tension of what had just occurred. Marcus moved with his cart, quiet as ever, methodical as ever, but something had shifted. The same hands that cleaned floors had just repaired the CEO's Ferrari, a feat no one else could have accomplished. Victor sat alone in his office, staring out at the city skyline. The morning replayed in his mind every accusation, every scream, every meticulous movement of Marcus's hands. He tried to convince himself it was luck, but deep down he knew it was. The truth burned hotter than pride. Marcus had skill, intelligence, and calm in the face of adversity. Victor had always believed in control. His world was simple: the powerful dominate, the rest obey. But the garage had proven him wrong. One man, overlooked and underestimated, had upended that belief in 60 seconds. He tried to shake it off. He told himself he didn't need Marcus, that he could hire someone better, someone loyal. But every technician he remembered had failed in ways Marcus had just corrected with ease. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to his usual routine. He cleaned bathrooms, swept hallways, and emptied trash bins, all with the same quiet dignity he always carried. To the outside world, nothing had changed, but inside him a storm brewed. He had saved a Ferrari. He had faced humiliation and anger, yet he had not retaliated, not even once. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the faint stirrings of recognition, not from Victor, but from knowing he had done the right thing. In the cafeteria, whispers spread quickly. Employees who had never noticed Marcus before now looked at him differently. Some were curious, some were envious, but Marcus didn't change. He nodded politely when greeted, smiled slightly at a passing coworker, and carried on. His actions, not words, commanded attention. Victor called his executive assistant, demanding the morning's events be documented. But she hesitated, unsure how to frame it. How do you record a man being humbled by someone society teaches you to ignore? He paced the office. He muttered to himself. The Ferrari sat in the garage, humming quietly, and Victor couldn't stop thinking about it. He began obsessively checking emails, reviewing engine reports, and calling his technicians for explanations he didn't fully want. Each attempt reminded him of one undeniable fact: Marcus had been right. Victor felt something unfamiliar: fear. Not of the man, not of losing the car, but fear of being exposed. Fear of weakness, fear of being proven morally and intellectually inferior. For a man like Victor, this was terrifying. Across the building, Marcus continued his work. The janitorial closet, once a place of invisibility, now held a quiet power. Marcus didn't seek acknowledgement, yet everyone who passed him felt it. His calm composure, his intelligence, his restraint in the face of rage, it resonated in a building where power was often confused with entitlement. Jenna observed from a distance. She had witnessed the event firsthand. She saw Victor's unraveling, Marcus's quiet strength, and the tension that lingered in the air. She realized that this wasn't just about a car. It was about truth meeting arrogance, humility confronting ego, and courage in the face of systemic dismissal. Victor, meanwhile, wrestled with himself. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to correct the injustice of his words, but his ego fought back. Years of power and domination made it impossible for him to admit fault easily. He sat at his desk, fists clenched, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened. Every engineer, every mechanic, every employee who had laughed or ignored Marcus came to understand something new. This janitor wasn't ordinary. He had skill, integrity, and courage, qualities that couldn't be bought, demanded, or forced. Victor's paranoia grew. He wondered if Marcus would demand recognition, if the story would leak, if the company would see him differently. The fear of losing control gnawed at him. Marcus, however, remained unaware of Victor's inner turmoil. He simply continued his work with precision, moving from task to task, focused on excellence and nothing more. His life had taught him patience, humility, and quiet strength. He had survived tragedy, injustice, and neglect, and this morning had proven that his worth wasn't determined by the opinions of those in power. Jenna moved closer, discreetly observing Marcus as he adjusted cleaning schedules and advised a colleague on equipment maintenance. She noted the care he took, the calm authority, and the respect he commanded without ever demanding it. Her mind raced with the realization that Marcus had not just fixed a Ferrari. He had disrupted a hierarchy, challenged a mindset, and reminded everyone of something fundamental. True value isn't always visible. Victor, meanwhile, called in a technician to verify Marcus's work. The man arrived, confident and meticulous, but after inspecting the Ferrari, he confirmed what Marcus had done: flawless, precise, and effective. Victor's internal storm intensified. He had been bested by someone he had dismissed entirely. And yet, despite the humiliation, there was admiration, though he refused to admit it aloud. By mid-afternoon, word began to spread. A few employees quietly praised Marcus. Some managers expressed surprise, others envy. But Marcus ignored it all. He didn't need validation. He never had. His actions spoke louder than any recognition could. Victor sat alone once more, staring at the phone. He wanted to call Marcus to assert authority or perhaps to apologize. But fear, pride, and habit held him back. He realized that Marcus had not just repaired the Ferrari, he had repaired something inside Victor too, the first crack in his ego. That night, Victor couldn't sleep. He replayed the morning over and over, the shouting, the calm, the repair. He realized something terrifying: Marcus wasn't just skilled. He was moral, disciplined, and unshakable. Everything Victor thought he understood about hierarchy, respect, and human value was now in question. And while Victor wrestled with his pride, Marcus quietly cleaned his tools, reviewed his tasks for the next day, and went home, unaware of the psychological storm he had unleashed. The building had changed. The power dynamics had shifted, imperceptibly but irrevocably. Victor's ego had been tested. Marcus's quiet strength had been proven. And Jenna, silently watching it all, understood that the real story wasn't the Ferrari. It was the collision of morality, skill, and human dignity that had taken place in that empty garage. The next morning, the building felt different. Even before Marcus arrived, employees sensed a shift. Whispers passed like currents. "Did you see what happened yesterday? The janitor fixed the CEO's car. Is it true?" Marcus entered the lobby as always, cart in hand, calm and precise. His footsteps echoed lightly against the polished floors, but no one dared approach him directly. Something about the way he carried himself now demanded attention, even without speaking. Victor, on the other hand, was a storm contained within his office. He had spent the night replaying the incident endlessly, his mind refusing to release the image of Marcus calmly fixing the Ferrari while he had screamed. Rage, pride, and a faint, unwelcome respect collided inside him. He had always believed knowledge was power, and here, knowledge had come from a place he had overlooked entirely. He tried to act normal in front of the staff. He held meetings, signed papers, smiled during board calls, but his eyes betrayed him. Every glance toward the garage, every subtle acknowledgement of Marcus, carried the weight of self-reckoning. Marcus, oblivious to Victor's inner turmoil, continued his routine, cleaning floors, checking supplies, helping colleagues, and quietly observing the building. He noticed small things others didn't: a loose wire here, a forgotten spill there. His mind worked both as a janitor and as an engineer. He never separated the two. The world had trained him to survive invisibly, but skill and integrity refused to hide. Word of the Ferrari incident spread slowly but deliberately. Some employees whispered to one another, impressed by Marcus's skill. Some executives, jealous and insecure, criticized him behind his back, yet Marcus never reacted. He had learned long ago that the opinions of others could not define him. His dignity, his competence, his calm, these were his own. Victor summoned his top engineer to review Marcus's work. The man arrived, confident in his own expertise, sure that he could prove Marcus had done something wrong. But after careful inspection, the engineer confirmed every adjustment was precise, every calibration perfect. Marcus's work had not only repaired the car, but had done so flawlessly. Victor's mind teetered on a knife's edge. Pride warred with truth. Ego fought humility. Fear shadowed admiration. For the first time, he realized that he had underestimated someone because of a uniform, because of the color of his skin, because of a story he had never bothered to hear. By mid-morning, Victor called Marcus to his office. The request was hesitant, awkward, almost apologetic. Marcus entered, cart left outside, hands clean, posture steady. He didn't smile, didn't fidget, didn't show ego. He simply nodded. Victor began, stumbling through words. I wanted to understand what happened yesterday. The car, you fixed it." "Yes, sir," Marcus said simply. "It needed a small adjustment, that's all." Victor paused, searching for a way to assert authority, to reclaim some sense of dominance. But Marcus's calm presence made it impossible. Every defensive strategy Victor considered fell apart under the weight of truth. The conversation turned quiet. Marcus explained the problem, the fix, the potential consequences if it had gone unnoticed. Victor listened, more silent than he had ever been in his life. He realized he had been wrong not just about the car, but about Marcus. A subtle tension built in the office. Victor's mind raced. Could he reward Marcus? Could he acknowledge him without shattering his ego? Could he admit, even internally, that the janitor had shown more competence in 60 seconds than some of his most trusted engineers had in years? Outside the office, Jenna observed quietly. She had seen Marcus act not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. She knew the moral weight of the morning, and she understood that Victor's reckoning was just beginning. Over the next few days, the building's atmosphere shifted. Colleagues treated Marcus differently, some with respect, some with suspicion, some with awe. Marcus continued his duties with the same quiet precision. He didn't seek attention. He didn't need it. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. Victor watched. Every day he felt the tension between ego and truth, pride and humility. He found himself reflecting on past mistakes, past judgments, the countless times he had overlooked talent, integrity, and dignity because they came from someone he deemed beneath him. Late one evening, Victor returned to the garage alone. The Ferrari sat there, polished, humming softly. Marcus had already gone home. Victor touched the hood lightly, almost reverently, and whispered to himself, "I underestimated you. I was blind." The admission surprised him. It was the first time he had allowed himself vulnerability in years. A strange emptiness filled him, not fear, not regret, but understanding. He realized that power was not measured by wealth or status, but by the ability to see and honor greatness wherever it resides. Meanwhile, Marcus's reputation grew quietly. Security guards nodded at him. Cafeteria staff greeted him warmly. Even a few engineers, initially skeptical, began to acknowledge his skill without needing him to prove it again. Yet Marcus never let it change him. Humility was a shield he carried, tempered by pride in his own work. Victor struggled internally. He wanted to offer recognition, perhaps even a promotion. But he feared Marcus would reject it, seeing it as charity. He feared the man would expose him, morally or socially. Every thought was laced with anxiety, guilt, and the unfamiliar taste of accountability. The tension reached a peak when Victor called a staff meeting under the guise of company updates. He stood before the room, trying to maintain control. Employees sat, expectant. Some eyes flicked toward Marcus, waiting. Victor cleared his throat. Before he could speak, Marcus quietly rose to refill a trash bin. A subtle gesture, yet everyone noticed. The room held its breath. Victor realized the room's focus had shifted. The janitor had become the center of attention, not him. Inside, Victor's chest tightened. He wanted to assert dominance, but he couldn't. Marcus didn't need to speak. His presence, his integrity, his calm had done the work for him. That night, Victor reviewed company policies. He drafted plans to formally recognize staff contributions, especially those overlooked. He drafted a tentative note to Marcus, not a bribe, not flattery, but acknowledgement. Yet when he tried to send it, his hands shook. Ego and humility wrestled again. Marcus, oblivious to the full extent of Victor's turmoil, went home, slept, and prepared for another day. He had done what he could, integrity first, recognition second. The world would catch up in time, or it wouldn't. That didn't change his worth. But the tension was rising. Victor's ego, Marcus's skill, and the building's whispers were all converging. Something was coming, a reckoning, an emotional explosion, a test that would force both men to confront not only the Ferrari, but themselves, their biases, and the system they were trapped in. The day of reckoning arrived. Victor Hemsworth, the CEO, entered the parking garage, but this time his steps were different. Gone was the arrogance, the roar of entitlement. Instead, he moved with a strange tension, a tightrope between pride and the fear of being humbled again. Marcus was there, as always. His cart leaned slightly against the wall, the cleaning supplies neatly arranged. He glanced at Victor but did not approach. The calmness in his posture radiated authority, despite the uniform that everyone had been trained to ignore. Victor's hands trembled slightly. He cleared his throat, trying to assert composure. "Marcus, I need to talk to you," he said, voice steady but fragile. Marcus nodded and followed him to the edge of the garage, where no one else could watch. I owe you an explanation," Victor began, though the words felt foreign. "Yesterday, I acted poorly. I yelled. Marcus raised a hand, stopping him. "Sir, I'm not here for apologies. I fixed the car because it was the right thing to do, nothing more. Victor's jaw tightened. He had spent years believing power and wealth equaled respect, that status silenced judgment. But here, standing before a man he had demeaned for years, Victor realized that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned. "And yet I still feel like I owe you something," Victor admitted, almost whispering. "Not for the car, for everything else, for how I treated you, for what I assumed about you." Marcus's eyes remained steady, unshaken. He didn't seek praise. He didn't demand recognition. He simply nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that Victor's words were his own reckoning, not a gift. Victor stepped closer. You're more than I realized, more than I allowed myself to see. You've taught me something I should have learned a long time ago." Marcus's expression softened. For the first time, he allowed a small flicker of understanding to pass between them. But then, Victor's voice rose, not in anger, but in confession. "I've been blind. All these years I judged people by their titles, their uniforms, their status. I ignored skill. I ignored integrity. I ignored dignity." He paused, the weight of his admission settling in. "I treated you like less than human, and yet you showed me exactly what I was missing. You showed me humility, courage, and brilliance." Marcus remained calm. He didn't lecture. He didn't demand Victor understand. But the silence itself spoke volumes, a quiet assertion that actions define character, not words. Victor swallowed, struggling with emotions he had long buried. Pride warred with recognition. Ego clashed with the truth he could no longer deny. Finally, he spoke the words he had avoided for years. "I was wrong." It wasn't an apology, it was more than that. It was the first admission of humility Victor had allowed himself in decades. A sudden movement caught their attention. Jenna, the observant colleague, had quietly entered the garage. She watched, wide-eyed, as the two men faced one another. She understood what was happening. This wasn't just about a Ferrari. It was about justice, integrity, and the courage to confront one's own biases. Victor turned slightly, addressing her. "You saw all of this?" Jenna nodded. "Yes, sir, and it's not just about the car, it's about respect, and Marcus deserves it." Victor's chest heaved. He felt the full weight of his arrogance and the pain it had caused. He wanted to act to correct his mistakes, but he didn't yet know how. Marcus finally spoke. "Sir, I didn't fix the car for recognition. I fixed it because it needed fixing. You have the opportunity now to do the right thing, not for me, but for yourself." Victor's hands trembled. He realized she was right. True leadership, true respect, and true power were not about status or fear. They were about seeing the value in others, acknowledging it, and acting accordingly. He took a deep breath. "Marcus, I want to make things right, not just for you, but for everyone I've ignored, everyone I've underestimated. I want to change that." Marcus's expression softened further. For the first time, he allowed a small nod of approval. He didn't need words. Victor understood the power of recognition, of humility, and of justice was enough. A brief silence fell over the garage. Then Victor did something unexpected. He walked over to the Ferrari, touching the hood lightly. "This car, this symbol, it taught me something about myself I didn't want to face. You've done more than fix a machine, Marcus. You've fixed a part of me." Marcus looked at him, eyes steady, unshaken. "Sir, you fix yourself by acknowledging the truth, not by seeking forgiveness. That's where real change begins." Victor's throat tightened. His ego, once a roaring storm, had been subdued. And in its place arose understanding, humility, and a newfound respect for those he had overlooked. For a moment, the garage was silent, holding the gravity of the transformation that had occurred. Marcus, the janitor, stood with quiet dignity. Victor, the CEO, stood humbled. And Jenna, witness to it all, realized that a simple act, repairing a Ferrari, had catalyzed a moral and emotional reckoning that would ripple through the company and beyond. Victor finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, I want everyone to know. I want them to see your skill, your integrity, and your courage. You deserve recognition, not just from me, but from everyone here." Marcus shook his head gently. "Sir, recognition is not what I seek. Let your actions toward others reflect the lesson you've learned. That's enough." Victor paused, absorbing the weight of those words. He realized the truth Marcus spoke was harder than any technical repair. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and morality, one that Victor had spent decades avoiding. Then, without warning, Victor did something almost unimaginable. He knelt slightly beside Marcus, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of the man's worth. I see you. I finally see you, Marcus, and I promise I will not forget this lesson. Marcus's eyes softened, but he remained composed. He didn't need to respond. The acknowledgement, simple and human, was enough. Jenna, standing quietly nearby, allowed herself a small smile. She had witnessed more than a repair or a confrontation. She had witnessed redemption asterisk. She had witnessed the collision of arrogance and humility, of prejudice and justice, of ego and integrity. The tension that had gripped the garage for days, weeks even, finally dissipated. The air itself seemed lighter. Victor had faced the truth, Marcus had exemplified integrity, and the building itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the world to catch up. Victor rose slowly. He looked at Marcus, then at Jenna, then at the Ferrari. I have much to change, he admitted. Not just in how I see you, but in how I see everyone. Today I've learned the cost of arrogance and the value of dignity. Marcus nodded once, then you've begun. The moment was cinematic in its simplicity. A man humbled, a man dignified, and a silent witness to the moral transformation that had taken place. No fanfare, no applause, just the quiet acknowledgement of truth, integrity, and human value. Victor finally turned to the employees who had begun to gather at the edges of the garage, drawn by the commotion and whispers. He addressed them plainly, without ego, without pretense. Today I've learned a lesson, one that I hope you all carry forward. Marcus has shown us what real skill, courage, and integrity look like, and I ask you to respect him as you should respect anyone who demonstrates true worth, regardless of title, status, or uniform. The employees watched in stunned silence. Some eyes widened, some nodded, some, like Jenna, smiled knowingly. Victor turned back to Marcus. I will do better, I promise you, and I will make sure the company recognizes the value you bring, not just in repairing cars, but in showing what true integrity and dignity look like. Marcus finally allowed a faint, small smile. Not prideful, not arrogant, just recognition that the lesson had been learned. That justice, respect, and dignity had finally been restored. In that moment, everything shifted. The garage, the Ferrari, the building, and even Victor himself, all had been transformed by the quiet courage of one man who refused to compromise his integrity, and by the humility of another who finally saw the truth. The climax of the story was not destruction, not confrontation, but revelation asterisk. Ego had been shattered, respect had been earned, and the world, though unchanged externally, had altered irrevocably internally. The Ferrari purred quietly, a testament to Marcus's skill. Victor stood humbled, a man confronting the arrogance of a lifetime. And Marcus, the janitor, walked away with quiet dignity, leaving a moral imprint that no wealth, no power, and no title could erase. The days after the garage incident were quiet, but the impact resonated throughout the company. Marcus continued his work as usual, cleaning floors, emptying trash bins, polishing surfaces, and checking on the staff's equipment. To the outside eye, nothing had changed, but inside the building felt different, as if the air itself had shifted. Victor Hemsworth, the CEO, sat in his office with a new sense of purpose. The Ferrari incident had forced him to confront something deeper than a machine, his own arrogance, biases, and assumptions about people. Every interaction he had ever had with staff, every decision he had made, replayed in his mind. He realized that for years he had overlooked talent, integrity, and humanity simply because it didn't fit his worldview. He began with small acts. He called his senior managers into the conference room. The tension was palpable. These were people who had long respected his authority without question. Victor, however, spoke differently this time. His voice was calm, measured, but it carried weight. I've learned something important, he said. Respect isn't granted by titles or wealth. It's earned through actions, integrity, and courage. Marcus has shown all of these, and it's time we recognize him and anyone else we may have overlooked. Heads nodded silently, some out of understanding, others out of surprise. The employees were not used to seeing Victor admit fault or acknowledge someone so openly, but the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. Later that day, Victor asked to meet Marcus privately. Marcus entered, card in hand, steady and calm. He had not sought recognition, and he still moved with quiet dignity. Victor gestured toward a clean corner of the garage. Marcus, I want to formally acknowledge your work. Not just the Ferrari, though that alone was incredible, but everything you contribute to this building, this company, and this team. Your skill, your integrity, your dedication, it's extraordinary. Marcus shook his head gently. "Sir, I've never needed recognition for doing my job. I do what's right because it's right. That's all the reward I need." Victor hesitated, realizing that Marcus's humility was part of what made him remarkable. "I understand," he said, "but some lessons must be spoken aloud, and I want the company to see what you've done. If we do nothing, the example you've set could be lost." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then let them see, not for me, but so they understand what integrity and dignity really look like." Victor smiled faintly. It was the first real smile he had given in weeks, a smile born of understanding, of self-reflection, and of the recognition that leadership was not about power. It was about seeing people, really seeing them. Over the following weeks, Victor implemented changes throughout the company. Policies were revised to recognize the contributions of staff at all levels. Meetings were held to ensure that ideas from unexpected sources were heard. Employees noticed a subtle difference. The CEO, who had once demanded obedience, now sought input, listened actively, and acknowledged the value of those previously ignored. Marcus's reputation grew quietly but meaningfully. Staff began to consult him for advice beyond janitorial matters: how to approach problems methodically, how to stay calm under pressure, how to act with integrity even when unrecognized. He never sought credit, never boasted, but the lessons he imparted rippled through the company. One afternoon, Victor found himself alone in the garage again. The Ferrari sat gleaming, untouched, a silent monument to the events that had changed everything. He walked slowly around it, reflecting on the morning that had challenged everything he thought he knew. He thought about pride, judgment, and the arrogance that had shaped him for decades. He thought about Marcus, who had faced humiliation without retaliation, who had acted with calm authority in the face of anger, and who had reminded him that true worth is measured by integrity, not status. Victor felt a deep, almost painful shift within himself. He realized that leadership, power, and respect were not about asserting dominance, but about recognizing truth and honoring those who embody it. He left the garage, carrying the lesson with him, ready to approach the company with a renewed sense of morality and fairness. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his life quietly, unshaken by praise or attention. He had repaired more than a car. He had repaired the moral compass of a man who had long forgotten what true leadership meant. And in doing so, he had reminded everyone around him that dignity, skill, and integrity cannot be measured by uniform, position, or appearance. A week later, Victor held a small ceremony in the lobby. Employees gathered quietly, curious as he spoke. "I want to take a moment to recognize someone extraordinary," he began, voice steady and sincere. "Marcus has taught me and all of us that integrity, skill, and courage are not defined by title, status, or wealth. They are defined by actions and character. Marcus, thank you for reminding us of what true value is." Marcus stepped forward, nodding humbly. There was no boastful smile, no arrogance, just quiet dignity. The employees applauded not for spectacle, but because they understood what had been achieved, a lesson in morality, respect, and humility that transcended wealth and power. Victor approached Marcus and extended his hand. Marcus shook it firmly. In that handshake, decades of prejudice, arrogance, and oversight were acknowledged, confronted, and transformed. It was not just a gesture, it was a symbol of justice, respect, and redemption. Later, Jenna approached Marcus. "You changed the entire company without even trying," she said. Marcus smiled faintly. "It wasn't about changing them," he replied. "It was about doing what's right even when no one is watching. That's the only way change ever happens." Victor watched from his office, quietly reflecting. He had been humbled, educated, and transformed. He understood now that every interaction with others carried moral weight, and that recognizing the unseen contributions of those around him was a mark of true leadership. And as the sun set over the city, the building hummed with a new energy, one of respect, humility, and quiet dignity. Marcus continued his work, Victor continued his reflection, and the employees witnessed a shift in culture, one subtle yet profound. The Ferrari remained a silent witness to the morning that had sparked it all. But the true legacy was not a machine, not wealth, not power. It was the transformation of a man, the recognition of integrity, and the reminder that courage and dignity exist in places we often fail to see. The story ended not with spectacle, but with quiet moral victory. Marcus, the janitor, had restored not only an engine, but also a system of values long neglected. Victor, the CEO, had faced himself, confronted his arrogance, and embraced humility. and the company slowly but inevitably began to reflect the lessons learned, that real greatness is measured in integrity, courage, and the ability to see beyond status or skin. Sometimes the people we overlook, the ones society teaches us to dismiss, carry the most value. Marcus, a janitor, reminded us all that true greatness isn't defined by wealth, titles, or status. It's defined by integrity, skill, and courage, and by the quiet dignity with which we act, even when no one is watching. Victor Hemsworth, a man who had lived a lifetime of power and pride, learned a lesson he couldn't ignore. Respect cannot be demanded. Recognition cannot be bought. True leadership lies in seeing the worth in others, in acknowledging their contributions, and in confronting the biases we often carry unconsciously. The Ferrari, once a symbol of wealth and ego, became more than a machine that needed repair. It became a catalyst, a mirror reflecting what humility, courage, and moral integrity truly mean. One man's quiet strength had dismantled assumptions, challenged arrogance, and sparked transformation. This story isn't just about a car, a CEO, or a janitor. It's about what happens when we confront injustice, when we value the unseen, and when we allow humility to guide our actions. It's about understanding that every interaction, every decision, every acknowledgement carries weight. If this story teaches us anything, it's that dignity and respect are never owed. They are earned and recognized. And sometimes, it takes the courage of one overlooked individual to awaken the conscience of those blinded by pride. Remember this: the quiet acts of integrity, the calm courage in the face of unfairness, the commitment to do what's right. These are the moments that reshape lives, change hearts, and transform communities. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because greatness is everywhere, sometimes it just wears a uniform no one notices.